think you're muted, Melissa.
Oh,
Right.
let me see. Okay,
I
there.
guess Gray wants in on this.
Yeah,
What do you want, buddy?
my internet I think is getting a little choppy here, so we'll see how it handles.
Ah,
How
gotcha.
does the audio sound? Does it sound okay?
The audio sounds fine, yeah, but
Okay.
your video is off a little bit.
Yeah. Um, well, as long as my audio is good, I guess that's all I need to really hope for.
Your internet had too much barbacoa and Big Red.
That's exactly what happened. But normally that's the breakfast of champions here. So I
That's
know
funny.
it's a San Antonio thing. People always ask about it when I go other places. And
No,
one,
right.
what is barbacoa? Then you got to explain that one.
Yeah.
So we're just waiting on here. Let me go ahead and stop our ticker here.
No, buddy. Not right now. Go talk to Ryan.
He's really wanting to be involved in this
Oh, I'm not actually sure what it is that he wants. I thought maybe his door was closed or something, but no, that's not it.
one. Let's see. Yeah, like everything on my dashboard right now is just moving at slow speed, and it's the only thing opened. So I don't know. Huh. Not sure how to fix it. I think I had this on the last our last one too. I think this gave me a little bit of a
No, really.
yeah. So I don't know. I think my computer just gets spoiled of being plugged in straight into Wi-Fi, is it, and fiber cables. So let's see here, and I think we have James coming up, and I know there was we're going to be closed on Monday, so want to make sure that a lot of people realize that Monday is not a normal operating day. So if you're counting for the days in production on something, it's not a business day to count. So 'cause nobody will be here. It's Labor Day here in the U.S., and we're going to be giving our labor the day off.
Yeah, which they've probably been working overtime because I read that was it the last
Yeah, we're still.
newsletter that said that
And
you've gotten kind of that Christmas rush well way ahead of time.
yeah, I mean, good and bad. It's great that people are kind of getting that in now, and maybe they're getting, an influx of orders. A lot of people, I know I try to get all my Christmas shopping from ordering online done by October,
Wow,
just in
you're good.
case of any of because you can't predict shipping.
You don't know.
Um, and I
Yeah.
wish I could get the ticker to stop here. It doesn't. I can. Oh, let me take a look on YouTube on how it looks. I still see it on my frame. Do you still see it?
Nope.
You don't see the ticker? Okay. Well,
Mm-mm.
I'm seeing it here. This is like super weird on my dash. But yeah, so we're going to be closed, and that also means like our customer service is closed. And it's I know I think people just try it also for the weekends. You want to catch up on printing. You actually have time maybe away from your 9 to 5 to catch up on your artwork and photo work that you're doing on the side to make prints and stuff, and run into issues. And then unfortunately we're on holiday too, so not able to quite get to those, but we'll be back on Tuesday, and taking all of the thing in. So we'll still be here tomorrow as well. So if you have questions, get those in, and we'll do our best to get to those. But yeah, we're having a lot of order volume coming in. It's just great.
Good.
And
Keep
so
growing.
yeah.
I want to see that.
And then first Tuesday is going to be amazing. So that's next Tuesday. This is one of the months where first Thursday came before first Tuesday.
There's been a
And,
lot of that this year.
yeah, right.
It seems
And
like.
because in your mind you want to follow it by the day of the week, which
Yeah.
comes first. But um, with first Thursday in fir- we're in first. So first Tuesdays, James is going to actually do a great topic. He's done so much work. I mean, hours and hours of coding. If he logs in, you may not even recognize him because he has just put in so many hours on
Wow.
doing coding, watching the workflow of inventory,
Yeah.
uh, seeing what would work best, hopefully, for customers. And I tell people the thing about FinerWorks inventory is that it's made to kind of work on multiple platforms like Squarespace, Etsy. Um, that way you're not here having to replicate everything all of the time. So what's great is that James has kind of made it kind of here's them all in one, and he's looking at other platforms to integrate as well while he's working on our thing on our virtual inventory. So he's done a lot of hours in there, and he's going to give us a tour of all of the new little buttons and stuff that kind of let you customize your virtual inventory view for whatever your needs might be. And we're going to kind of go on the Shopify syncing because that's kind of really what started all of this. Shopify has a new um, they basically made a new standard, and if you have to be on their Shopify app. So there was like a group of standards they wanted from every retailer that's on there, any vendor that's on there. So we ended up having to work the last, I think it's been on about 2 months on working on that
Whoa.
program. Yeah, it's been a lot, and it's been
Wow.
heavy code work. Um, and then of course, we with FinerWorks being a live website, you really can't take time to take a break and say we're going to do it. So it's literally it's changing the wheels on the race car as it's going around the track, and we're just
Ugh.
kind of trying our hardest to not get run over. But we try to keep the site up and going while that's happening, and it's good because we also get a lot of user feedback on features. So it's going to be interesting on Tuesday to hear people's feedback as they're getting into using it, and kind of James is showing us just how we can better utilize it so that it makes ordering faster. It makes just your workflow a little easier for you. And FinerWorks does actually have a sale going on too. So it ends tomorrow. Um, and if you get a chance, just go to the FinerWorks site. We have a 30% off acrylic prints. And that ends tomorrow at midnight Central Time. You just use the promo ACR sale. It's the acrylic print sale there. If you've never tried your work or your photos on it, it's a nice presentation there. So
Yeah, acrylic is really cool.
yeah, have you printed much on acrylic before?
Much, no. Have I done it? Yes, but not much at all.
Oh yeah.
But I definitely think it's awesome and pretty darn cool. Is it? What's the size range? Do you know what the maximum size is?
Sure. Let me pull that up really quick here. We just go into our printing, go down into should share my screen, but I didn't know if that would slow it up more.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah, yeah.
flags. Hold
And
on.
do you have a? Is there a specific thickness, or is there a choice there as well?
Let me see. Let me see. We got our acrylic plaques. We got our framed acrylics, HD metals. Trying to go into our stuff, but I don't know why my pages are lagging so bad. Let's go into our acrylics accents. Well, I was hoping I could just easily click on stuff right now. Let me go in here, find our papers, specialty acrylic plaques. Let me see. And our acrylic plaques are different. I just want to find our acrylic um, things on here so I can give you the sizes on here and
Can
thickness.
the acrylic plaque, is that one that can stand up on its own, like be set on a end
Yes.
table or a
Mm-hmm.
shelf?
Yeah, that one's.
That's cool.
Have you tried that yet? I've seen a couple of things on it, and it's been amazing. I'm watching people, they send in help tickets, trying to utilize it to do some other stuff, like to have it all clear. They're trying to go for maybe I want to say stained glass look on some of their stuff, and
Oh,
um, yeah, I mean it's some things we never thought of it with it, but it kind of has it. Oh, I guess I'm not going to be able to click right on my stuff, unfortunately. But if you go to our site and click on there, it'll give you the details of our acrylics in there, so you can start ordering
Cool.
in there. Just don't know what happened to my poor internet today. We had some issues earlier, and I think that's what's doing. But yeah, did you have how was your whole last month? I mean, August just seemed to roll by and finish, and
Other than the heat of the summer, that's you can definitely keep in your mind. The days went by quickly.
yeah, it was
It sure seems like the summer's already over. We were talking about back to school before summer ended, and now everybody's back to school. And our boys are older, so we don't have anyone in school anymore. But you definitely hear about it
yeah.
regardless. But yeah,
It's
and
the
I
one
can't
thing I
believe it's
like on
September
Facebook.
already. How's
Yeah,
that
I know.
possible?
I know. Before you know, it'll be end of school year too. Um, well, I'm gonna go ahead and let me put you as our thing. I've already put the presentation link in the chat, so if people want you, they can go right there. And for those of you watching this later on the recording on YouTube, it's going to be in the description of the video. So if you go ahead and just click on down there, you'll see a link to Jim's presentation today. And let me go ahead and make you, I wanted you here in the center. And again, don't know what's going on with my stuff, so it's not letting me drag anything or move anybody here. So let me find a way to make us at least here. We'll do this. Let's see if this, I want to increase the size here, and then I want to be able to let you, and I think if I take myself out, then I can't get you, you won't be able to hear me if I take myself out of this stream here. But let's see. Let me see if I can make Jim the main presentation here. Yeah, okay, that's me. But now I want to put you in here. And it ain't letting that happen. Technical difficulties today. The gremlins want to play, so I'm going to let them. And I will let you introduce our topic today on using your light meter, which to me is such an important tool because to me, lighting is everything for your photography. I think that just makes a photo. How well you use light is really what makes a photo.
Well, that based on its simple definition, photography means light drawing. And so you're absolutely right. It plays a huge role in how your photographs look. And so uh, your light meter exists in your camera and it exists as a separate handheld unit, although very few people today have that. Go back a number of years and you wouldn't be taken seriously if you didn't have a light meter. But there was a lot of things about photography you wouldn't be taken seriously if you didn't have. For instance, if you didn't have a physical place for people to come see you, have your work shown up on your own walls, a studio or at least an office space, if you just had your business in your house 30 years ago, you were not taken seriously. And maybe even as few as 20 years ago. But in the last 20 years, there's been a huge shift in what is acceptable as a professional portrait photographer. And I think it's great that it's expanded into lots of different areas. But that's just change. Things happen, and that's all good. But light meters, not a whole lot has changed with light meters, at least their base goal, their reason for being. You have a light meter inside your camera. You've had a light meter inside your camera for 40, 50 years. So that's not an unusual thing. But even your cell phone has a light meter in it. I mean, you can You can see it if you take your cell phone and just turn it just a little bit. Oh, I don't want to get that. Well, I guess I'm going to show that no matter what. But up in the top, if I get it at just the right angle, you can see the camera and you can see several different things across the top. One or two of those, maybe even, is a light meter. So even in your cell phone, you have a light meter, just showing how much light you have. But you've seen it before where your screen is bright in some situations on a cell phone and sometimes it's not quite as bright. It changes on a bright sunny day, it's real bright. If you have it in a lower light environment, it dims down a little bit if you have it in its auto setting. Well, how does it know? It's got a light meter. So yeah, your cell phone has a light meter, your camera has a light meter, and for those of us who choose, we have a handheld light meter. And I have seen a cell phone being used as a handheld light meter, although there's some things that it won't have that it doesn't have that a real handheld meter would have. So it's not real effective for that purpose, but it's still kind of cool that you've got a light meter in your cell phone, along with the other 1,000 apps that you have there, or 10,000 apps you have access to. So thank you guys for being here with us today and investing your time to grow and learn or just refresh your information about photography as we talk about your exposure meter, your light meter. So I will share my screen here
And
so that you can see what I'm looking at. This is my handout.
I'm going to try to make that big here. And I want to say hello to Lindsay, who's there watching on YouTube. And let me add that in. Let's see. I'm going to
Hi,
watch.
Lindsay.
Can I see that? There we go. No, I think
Got
that's
it on there. That's fine. That looks good.
yeah. Yeah, and if you're watching, if you want to in the chat, drop in where you're watching from.
Yeah, good idea. Where you're watching from, and if you're watching this live with us right now, I think most people watch via replay
Hmm.
for this particular show. But if you're watching live, I want you to enter in hashtag live, so I know you're watching live. And if you're watching the replay, then do us a favor and enter in hashtag replay,
Yeah.
so we know how people are watching. And that does help us in knowing how to present this and what type of different things to add in. Oh, good.
Got Lindsay, who's publishing her photography artwork, launching in a few weeks. Great. Well,
Cool.
yeah, a lot of people here are doing stuff with Photo Septiembre. So we have a lot of people who are debuting their work right now in San Antonio. And Lindsay's watching from North Carolina there. So
North Carolina. Very cool.
thank
Glad
you
you're
for
here,
your
Lindsay.
interest, Lindsay. We appreciate it.
All right. So today's show is all about using your light meter. And the goal of a light meter and a camera is simply to get the correct amount of light. It's just a tool, just like any other tool, just like the tools at a big store like a Home Depot, a Lowe's, lots of different stores across the U.S. And beyond. But the inside at one of those tool stores, the tools are all good. They're all good tools, but they aren't all tools that you need right now. And so the difference between a good tool and a bad tool is really not it's nowhere near as relevant as the difference between a good tool and the right tool to help you solve whatever goal that you have, whatever you're trying to accomplish. So in this instance, we are talking about the tool of your light meter or exposure meter. Now, as you can see on the screen, and I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger real quick. Let's do view and zoom, and let's make this 200% might be too big, but let's find out. I'll just move it around just a little bit. Yeah, that's a little bit too big. All right, so I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. Change that zoom to probably about 160. We'll find out. There we go. That's a little bit better. So right here in the middle of the screen, you can see where it says exposure meter, and then there's this little graphic. And this is from a Canon camera that's probably 5 years old. So a common look of one of those little screens that's up on the top of the camera that you look down into as you're holding it, and also sometimes on the back side of the camera. So you'll see things on it, and for those of you who are already aware, you know exactly what's on it, but let's just go over those real quick. Right across the top, you see 1/60. That is just showing what shutter speed you have chosen right now. Now, if you're in a shutter priority mode, you're the one who's responsible for choosing that. If you're in an aperture priority mode, then you're choosing the next one where it says f.8. And it's choosing the shutter for you. And you can see down below 160 where it says AV on a Canon, and on a one or two other cameras it says AV, and that stands for aperture value. And most of the time it's just a shutter priority or an aperture priority mode, but it's aperture value. And what that says is you are in control of your aperture, your f-stop. An aperture is just a hole that lets light in. The f-stop is the unit of measurement to measure that hole that lets light in. So it's kind of like a ruler when you're measuring something, the size of a print. So that 1/60, your camera is in control when you are in AV mode. But when you're in manual mode, you're in control of both things. And you're in control of your ISO as well. ISO stands for International Standards Organization. Now, between these three things, your shutter speed, your f-stop, and your ISO, this is how you control the amount of light coming into your camera. Now, each one of these has a side effect. So you are actually in control of something in addition to amount of light. The effect of all three is amount of light. The side effect of all three is different. The side effect for shutter, you get to control the amount of time. So you can stop time if you want to, stop motion. Or you can convey motion, allow the motion to be collected on your image sensor or film. The side effect for aperture is you can control the depth of your focus. Now it's called depth of field, but I like to explain it as depth of focus. For instance, you can choose to have, if you're photographing me, you can choose to have just me in focus and my background out of focus if you'd like. But if my background helps tell my story, then it wouldn't make any sense to blur it out. So you'd want to include it. Let's say that we were taking a trip to the Grand Canyon. If we totally blurred out the background, we may as well have stayed in the backyard, because we can blur out the background here, and here you might want to. But if we're at the Grand Canyon, we want to see it clearly. And so we want to purposefully choose a high numbered f-stop in that instance. If we want to blur out the background, we want to purposefully choose a low numbered f-stop. Those are side effects. Now, what about ISO? The higher the number of the ISO, the greater the dots are, the grain, the little dots that make up the photograph are called pixels. Actually called picture elements, and pixels was slang. But probably about 5 years ago, pixels got added to the dictionary. And so it's a real word now. It got elevated, unlike Pluto that got lowered in its standard to it's not a planet anymore. Poor Pluto. But pixels got elevated. It's now a real word, and it just is the dots that make up the photograph, because every photograph is just made up of dots. Lots and lots of dots. A huge amount of dots. So when you increase the ISO number, you also increase the size of the dots that make up your photograph. And so you don't want to purposefully raise those dots unless you have to. Why would you have to increase the size of the dots? All right, so you're not really increasing, you don't have to, you're not doing it because you want to increase the size of the dots. You're increasing that number, ISO number, because you want to increase the amount of light. And the only reason you do that is if the shutter speed and f-stop you have are already exactly what you want, and you still don't have enough light. Then and only then, as a last step, you photographers probably have been taught that ISO is the first step. It's not. It's the final step of the three. I was taught ISO was first also. And because I was taught by film photographers, that made sense. Because you had to buy your film before choosing your shutter speed and ISO. You had to have it in your camera in order to do anything. Of course, you would choose your ISO first. But it's not that way anymore, guys. Not anymore. You choose your shutter speed and your f-stop based on what you're trying to accomplish. The side effects and the amount of light. And then if there's not enough light, you will have to raise your ISO after you've chosen those other two. So that makes ISO the last step of the three light variables. Now, your exposure meter is what tells you what the correct amount of light is. But its goal is quite simple. It's not anywhere near as intelligent. Your camera is nowhere near as intelligent as you might think it is. If you think your camera is intelligent, it's simply because you have more to learn. That's all it is. When you look at another person who's got more knowledge in a certain subject, you think of them as being smart in that subject. So therefore, that's why we see sometimes, those of us who don't understand our camera, we see the camera as being smart. In fact, we'll call it a smart mode. But once you have a good understanding of what this is all about, you'll quickly realize your camera is just not smart at all. The systems on it are really, really simple. That's not a bad thing. It's just how it is. And if we know how it is, if we know what the tools do, what they're capable of doing, then we have all the advantages we need to create the most beautiful creative images that we can envision. And the more we continue to learn about the tools that are available to us. By the way, on a camera, without any accessories, there are over 100,000 different combinations of tools available. And most of us are limited to 3. We just don't know enough yet. So therefore, we view the camera as smart. It is for you right now if you feel that way. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm telling you you're right. But I'm also telling you, if you continue to learn, you just won't see it that way any longer. With your exposure meter, your camera's meter does one thing. And that is find the halfway point between solid black and solid white. That's just the midway point. If you were to take that solid black and that solid white, and we were to turn them into paint, if we included 50% of that solid black, 50% of that solid white, mixed them together, what would we have? Middle gray. The halfway point between solid black and solid white. Middle gray. By the way, this is called 18% gray because that's how much light it reflects. However, don't worry about that technical 18%. It's important once you get learn more and more and more. But for now, I just want you to keep it simple and call it middle gray, the halfway point between solid black and solid white. So because we have this constant, then even if it's off by a little bit, we can still rely on it because it is a constant. In other words, it's taking all the tones that are in your image. By the way, go over something real quick. Your light meter has no idea what color is. It's not smart enough. The only thing it does is read how much light is being reflected off of surfaces in the scene. That's all it reads. How much light's being reflected off of the different surfaces in the scene. You look at the scene and you see contrast. You see color. You see color contrast. Your camera sees contrast, Your camera's light meter sees contrast, but it's only seeing the contrast between the amounts of light being reflected off of surfaces, and it's taking that and it's averaging it to the middle. By the way, let's talk about contrast for just a moment. There's several different types of contrast, but let's isolate just two. There's three main, but there's two that I want to talk about right now. Light contrast, color contrast. Now, light contrast would be if I have a lot of light reflecting off the surface versus not much light at all or no light being reflected off of the surface. The extreme between those two is a contrast. But we also see color contrast, something that a camera can't. We look at, you've seen a Christmas poinsettia probably. There's several different variations of those, but let's talk about the classic one that has red leaves on top and green leaves on bottom. And it's a very saturated color. That red is really red, and that green is really thick, saturated dark green. And to us, those are, if we had a color wheel, looking at a color wheel, we obviously see these are opposites on a color wheel. So providing a large amount of contrast between the two. But because they reflect the same exact amount of light, your camera meter reads those as identical. In fact, if you were to photograph a black and white image, change your camera to monochrome, you'd see this. When you photograph in black and white, assuming you don't have any filters, because if you have a filter, it will affect that. But if you're just a straight image, no filtering, you will see that red top and that green bottom of that poinsettia plant in a black and white image as the same shade of gray. Absolutely no difference between the two. Your camera meter reads shades of gray. It does not have any understanding whatsoever of color contrast like we do. Unless you have a color deficiency. I understand some people do. But most of us have a good understanding. By the way, if someone had a complete color deficiency, they would look at a poinsettia, the red-green poinsettia, and see it as having no difference. They would not be able to tell the difference between the red and the green. It would look the same shade of gray to them. Now, that's an extreme example. Most people who have those color deficiencies don't have 100% color deficiency. And so they actually can see the difference. So that would be an extreme example. I don't know that there's anyone that has 100%. Maybe there is. I just don't know. I don't study that. I study photography. But I can relate it to those things, of course. And so because we have this middle gray, it gives us a constant, a reference point from which to compare. Because our camera's light meter is only giving us that halfway point. However, not all images is that the correct amount of light. For instance, if I'm photographing that is dark, it's supposed to be dark, the camera's meter takes it to middle gray, meaning it brightens the image. If our goal was to keep it looking dark like it is, then our light meter got it wrong. But our light meter doesn't get things wrong because its goal is not to get the exposure correct. Its goal is to average the scene to middle gray. Conversely, let's say we're photographing at the beach. And let's go to an extreme. Let's say we're in the Gulf of Florida. So we're in Florida and we're on the Gulf side. So let's say Destin, Florida. The sand is white. I mean, it's white. Even the crabs are white. And by the way, if you go out at night with your flashlight, you'll see them all over the place. During the day, you don't see them. But you have this bright white sand and this green and blue, I mean, just amazing color water. And everything's very bright. It's supposed to be bright. Your camera meter averages the scene to middle gray. Therefore, it darkens that image. Now, I'm not saying it makes the sand the color of the sand in Texas. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is it's darker than it should be. So therefore, because you know it's going to be averaging the scene to middle gray, you can adjust it to make it the right amount of light from your point of view. from what you're trying to convey. All right. Before I go on, I see James here. I wanted to say hi to him real quick. Hey, James, how are you doing? You didn't anticipate doing me calling you out, did you? You're just sitting there watching, all nice and calm. I know how busy you are, so the fact that you're able to be here, I'm surprised.
Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. But yeah, I've been quite busy. Uh, uh, we have some exciting stuff coming up on Tuesday for our users with virtual inventory and integration, so that people can, hopefully it can be a better tool for those that are trying to sell their artwork or their photos on their website or via other means, such as Etsy and so forth. So that's what I've been working on, trying to get that prepared.
Sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. And but we have some new things that are right around the corner and that we're working on as well, that I can't really go into detail too much just yet, but we're hopefully we'll have some exciting surprises in the coming few weeks.
Cool.
So, but yeah, sorry I was running late.
Well, I didn't think you'd be able to get here at all. So it's a surprise that you're able to be here, knowing how busy you are. So I'm glad you're here. You just needed a quick break, I guess.
Yeah, this was kind of a somewhat of a break. I'm still working as you speak, but
Good.
yeah. So
Good.
I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. And
All right. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh man. All right. So it's always fun to talk to James and Melissa. You guys, you have to know there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes at a lab. And some of it is obvious. It's stereotypical. There's certain things you'd expect to go on, but multiply that by 100 and you'd be about right. Because there's lots of things going on. There's lots of supplies coming in from different sources, and a plan B when something doesn't work out, so that things go smoothly for us, making us as photographers and artists. Of course, I lean more towards the photography side, but I'm well aware there's artists of all different types of mediums who work with FinerWorks. But it's so that we look like heroes to our clients. They are putting a huge amount of effort into causing that to happen, into making us look amazing with our final product. And so I guess on behalf of all of us who are taking advantage of the wonderful service and products of FinerWorks, I want to thank you guys for all the effort you put in that we couldn't even possibly be aware of. We couldn't possibly know about, but we know, because our end result looks fantastic, that you guys must have done something to make that happen. So thanks for that, you guys. FinerWorks rocks. All right, back to metering modes, your exposure meter. So we've just talked about how your camera's meter is the midway point. It reads shades of gray, and it averages the scene to the midway point between solid black and solid white. Now it does that in approximately 3 different ways. Your camera probably has 4. It could have a 5th, but it probably does it in 4 different ways. But one is a smart mode. Let's talk about the ones that aren't the smart modes. And you have basically 3 different choices, 3 different types in this instance. And so your metering modes, let's bring that up just a little bit higher. There we go. You have basically 3 different metering modes. You have one is it measures the entire scene, whatever it is that you have in your composition. So if you zoom in, zoom out, it's adjusting to wherever it is, that whatever is in the scene, whatever light is passing through the lens, so that your camera's meter can see it, can evaluate it. You have 3 different modes. The first is the entire scene. It's taking the entire scene into consideration. But you don't have to do that. If you're a landscape photographer, you may want to do that unless there's something specific in the landscape you're trying to meter for. But if it's just the entire scene, then you want the entire scene to be read. It's the right tool. Now, there's times, though, when your subject is relatively centered in your scene. Sometimes you put it off on one side, so that's not what I'm talking about, but sometimes your subject is relatively centered. If that's the case, especially if there's a difference in light between what you have on the sides of an image, if it's horizontal, if it's vertical, then on the top and the bottom, but that center section, if that's where your subject is, then center weighted averaging is where you want it to be. And so it's reading the center of the scene, and it's giving less effect to the sides or the top and the bottom, depending on whether you have it horizontal or vertical. But there are also times when it's just one little spot, one thing in the middle that is your subject, and you care less about the other things. So then you would want it on spot metering, where it's just a spot in the middle of the entire scene. So you've got the entire scene, you've got center weighted, and you've got that little spot right in the center. This is when you use these different tools for different goals. And you have these on your camera. You've got the ability to choose which metering mode you want to choose. And I'm going to scroll this back up just a little bit so you can see this on the screen again. At the top of your screen right now, you see that little gray screen that has the different pieces and parts, the different tools available on your camera, some of them. But right under this red box, and I'm going to talk about that red box here in a second, but right under that red box, centered right under it, is a box with a circle, a little dot in the middle of it. That is this metering mode number 3, a spot in the middle of the scene. That's what that represents. If it was a larger one, it would have 2 brackets that represent a circle. And if it's the full, it has nothing in it. Your camera also has a smart metering mode, and it goes by different names. Evaluative or others. It goes by different names. So it's just a smart metering mode, and you change it. That's where you change it. So you go to it and then you make the change. Now, let's talk about what is in that red box. That is your exposure meter, and you can see that right now it's right in the center. That's at 0. In fact, when I'm teaching my students, I call it zeroing out the meter. Now, you only zero out the meter when you're in manual mode. If you're in auto mode, program mode, there's 3 program modes, so the P4 program, but then you have 2 additional program modes. That's aperture priority, which this example is on, and shutter priority. And on Canon cameras, it'll say TV instead of an S. So you have those 3 program modes plus the auto mode. And those you don't have control. You don't have the ability to go under and over without doing one additional thing, and that's exposure compensation. And so if you decide in one of the program modes that you want to, if you're in auto mode, you don't get this choice. But if you're in one of the program modes and you believe that it's too bright or it's too dark, you can change it by clicking on a Canon, be clicking that AV button and holding it and rotating so that it goes either to the plus or to the minus side, and then create a new image, because it does nothing to the image you've already created. The only thing this is doing is what you're about to create. By the way, a word about my vocabulary. I don't like saying taking pictures, because in my head that's not correct English. Now, I understand it's socially correct and everybody understands what you mean, but in order to take something, it must have already existed. And a photograph doesn't yet exist until you've created it. And so I want to use correct vocabulary, correct terminology. You're creating an image or you're creating a photograph. A picture is what, that good photographer next door does. He takes good pictures. I create beautiful photographs. All right, enough of that. So that meter that's in the box. Now, that little red box, I've added that. You won't see the little red box around it. I just did that to isolate, to show you this is the light meter. This is where it's being represented. And you don't have direct access to it. You have access to it by changing your shutter speed, your f-stop, or your ISO. That's how you gain direct access to it. So it's not just a matter of moving it around when you're in manual mode. But if you're in aperture priority or shutter priority or program mode, the 3 program modes, then you do have direct access to it. And you are changing it to a minus or a negative of your choice to make it look what you consider to be just right. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. If you think it looks right, it's right. If you think it doesn't look right, it's not right yet. You get to choose. It's up to you. I hear people say that the picture didn't come out. That means that you, as the user, didn't do it right yet. There's no, the picture didn't come out. That doesn't exist. That's you not taking control if you're saying that. So if the picture came out right, it's because you made it happen. If the picture didn't come out right, it's because you have more work to do. Simple as that. All right. So you have this light meter, and on some cameras, this example you're seeing here goes from -2 to +2. But on a lot of cameras, it goes further than that, maybe 3, maybe 5. And those represent a stop of light. Now, I want to define what a stop is. A stop is a doubling or a halving of amount of light. So if I take the light that's in this room and I cut it by 50%, that's one stop. If I take the light in this room and I double it, that's also one stop. It doesn't matter which direction I go. It matters. It's just like an inch. An inch is an inch, no matter whether you go to a lower number or a higher number. If you've got a ruler and you're looking at the 4 to 5 inch range, and you move it up from the 5 to 6, or you move it down to the 3 to 4, it's still an inch. It doesn't change. It's an inch. Same thing here. It's a stop. It doubles or it halves the amount of light. Now, you have on your camera the ability to click. You click 3 times, and that is one full stop. I'll mention that again later. But that's how light is measured, is in units of stops, and you can get down to thirds of stops. Now, you can see with your own eyes down to about tenths of stops, but that's really overkill. And it would take a lot of rotating to get things just right. So the camera manufacturers were smart in that and just put it on thirds of stops, because that gets you plenty close enough. Besides, you're going to mess with it a little bit. If you know anything about Photoshop and Lightroom, chances are you're going to mess with it later anyway. So it's really, really close when you have it down to thirds of stops. Anything else is overkill. All right, so exposure. Both shutter and aperture were designed to change the exposure in one-stop increments. ISO 2. A doubling or halving of the amount of light. And this is broken down into thirds of stops. So every 3 clicks of that rotator wheel is a stop of light. Let's talk about equivalent exposures. I want to spend just a moment with this, because this is an area, unless we're really spending a lot of time on manual photography, manual mode, we need to spend a lot of time with equivalent exposures when we're talking about that subject, because it has a lot to do with it. But I need to touch on it when I'm talking about your exposure meter. If you change the f-stop by 1 stop down, for example, which causes you to have half the amount of light, and you increase the shutter speed by 1 stop, bringing in more light on your shutter speed, then you have the exact same amount of light coming into the camera. I'm going to repeat that just in case. If I start off with an exposure, create an image, and then in preparation for the next one, I take my f-stop and I reduce the amount of light by 1 stop, and I take my shutter speed and increase the amount of light by 1 stop, I have the same exact amount of light. And if I'm looking at those 2 images, they look identical. Now, that's on a minor scale. When would I actually use something like that? Well, let's say I'm photographing something that I wanted to stop the motion of. A brief word on that. Several years ago, And then again, about a week ago, I heard someone saying that eventually there'll be no need for still cameras. There'll only be video cameras because the quality already in video cameras is so good that you could take an image off of a moving image and use it as a still. Now, that's a true statement. But there's one major flaw in that way of thinking. That's impossible. It's not going to happen. Now, can you do it? Yes. But you lose control over shutter speed. You're limited to 1 shutter speed. Now, you can choose it, but you're limited to 1. So therefore, if I am photographing a baseball game and I want to catch the ball just when it comes off of the bat, just before it goes over the wall for a home run, if I want to stop and use that image, it's going to be blurred. I won't be able to see the little red strings that hold the leather together on the ball. But if I have a still camera with a fast enough shutter speed, I will be able to see that. So if my goal, let's get back to that was a little aside there. If my goal for equivalent exposures, let's say I have the right exposure, but I have decided I need to make a change in order to make the side effect happen that I want to happen. And maybe I'll give you 2 examples of this one. So the first, let's say I'm photographing that baseball game. And I have a correct exposure, but it was at a 60th of a second, let's say, just like this, like you see on your screen right now. But let's say that 60th of a second showed blurring of the player, of the bat, of the ball. I'm going to change that shutter speed to a faster shutter speed. Now, how fast? Probably 1,000th of a second, maybe 2,000th of a second. If I have enough light, that's where I'm going to go because I want to stop that motion. Maybe in a 4,000th of a second. I'm going to go faster in order, a very, very short period of time. A shutter speed is a summary of the period of time that light comes in and hits the imaging plane. Now, that's an image sensor if you're a digital camera. If you're a film camera, it's film. So that imaging plane. A shutter speed is a summary of the period of time that light is allowed to come in and hit the imaging plane. So if I want a very short summary, real fast, stopping the motion, I am going to have to choose a very fast shutter speed. Now, in choosing that very fast shutter speed, I'm allowing a lot less light to come into my camera. So therefore, I must compensate. I have to have an equivalent exposure. My tools are going to be different, but my exposure is going to remain the same because it looked good on that first one. I just had blur. So therefore, I'm going to change that shutter speed to a faster shutter speed. Now, that is the side effect that I want. So I'm going to change it there, knowing that that reduces the amount of light coming in. And so I'm going to change my f-stop to bring in more light. However, it's quite likely to not be enough light. And so therefore, I must go finally to my ISO and raise it to the point where I now am able to get that shutter speed that I need. Now I have an equivalent exposure. All right. I said I'd give 2 examples. All right, let's do the second one. Let's say you are photographing your kids at your kids up on the stage for a choir concert, and you're out. You are out in the audience, and you know what? I'm going to do a different one because I want to use f-stops as my example this time. All right. So you're photographing a sunflower, and behind it are some, I don't know, a neighborhood and some electrical wires. And so you have your camera in a program mode or auto mode, and those things in the background come out sharp and clear. You don't have to keep it that way. That exposure is correct. But I want to use the side effect of my f-stop and blur out that background because I don't want to see that neighborhood. I don't want to see those power lines. I want to see that amazing, beautiful sunflower and blur the background. And so I'm going to create a second image of equivalent exposure, but using my side effects to be able to blur out the background. So in that instance, I'm going to choose purposefully an f-stop, an aperture. An aperture is just the hole that lets light in. The f-stop's the unit of measurement. So I'm going to choose an f-stop that has a low number. Whatever the lowest number I have on my camera, probably. It's actually a function of the lens, but you're controlling it on the camera. So whatever that lowest number is probably, I'm going to go all the way down to that lowest number. And depending on the lens, I'm going to probably wish that I had a lower number. But if that's the case, get a little bit closer to your subject. Because the closer you are to your subject and the further away your background is, the more out of focus your background can become with a low f-stop number. But I have the same equivalent exposure in both images. That variable doesn't change. All right, so I hope that makes sense. So let's give a kind of an overview. Photography is essentially a game of two functions: the aperture and the shutter. Each controls exposure and one side effect. Therefore, we generally decide which side effect matters more, time or depth of focus, and then we choose the aperture or shutter accordingly. We then use the opposite function to balance out the meter, and then finally, we use our ISO when we can't easily balance our meters, knowing that increasing it will slightly compromise the quality of the photograph, because the side effect of ISO is those dots that make up the photograph become larger. You can see them better, which we don't generally want to do. It's not a positive side effect for in most instances. Now, depending on the printing material that you wind up printing it on, some printing materials have quite a bit of give, a leeway. For instance, if you're printing on canvas, you don't have to worry quite as much about these dots. Now, you still have to. You still need to have those keep them in consideration. But you've got some leeway there. But if you're printing on aluminum or acrylic, something that's more glossy, these dots, the quality of your photograph is incredibly important. So we have to be thinking about what the end result is also when we're making a choice of what different light variables we want. All right. I want to talk about dynamic range. This is sometimes called exposure latitude. I believe when I was in school that my teacher called it exposure latitude, but I don't hear that anymore. This was something that you definitely talked about with film, and it is, every once in a while I hear someone talking about it, but for the most part I hear dynamic range, and it doesn't matter because they're exactly the same thing. This is the range of tones from solid black to solid white and all the shades of gray in between. We humans can see about 14 stops worth of light. Now let's make sure I go over what the definition of stop is again. A stop is a doubling or halving of an amount of light. So if I take the light that's currently in my environment and I double it, that's one stop. If I take this light that's currently in my environment and I cut it in half, that is one stop. But if I have all three of those, half of the amount of light, the normal amount of light, and double the amount of light, I have 3 stops worth of light. Our cameras have a minimum of 1 more stop on each side, making up 5 stops. Film has 7, so another 2 on each side. So it has more exposure latitude or dynamic range. Film has more dynamic range than a lot of cameras do. But that is quickly changing. Over the last 10 years, if not more, the exposure or dynamic range, the dynamic range of cameras has increased. Now, this is a function of your imaging sensor. The technology there keeps on getting better. And while we can see approximately 14 stops, there are some cameras nowadays, over the last 5-10 years actually, that can collect even up into the double digits. So 10, 11. There are some that claim to do 14 and 15, but I've seen the tests of those and they're showing 11. So This is research that I didn't do. This is research that I read. So I trust it, but I'll leave it up to you to do your own research. And of course, that is their intent. Their goal is to expand the range. Now, what does this actually mean? This is in those shadow areas or in those highlight areas, how much detail can we still see? Now, with our own eyes, there's times when we are seeing a scene where maybe it's a dark room and we can't see anything in it. We know there's stuff in it because we've been in there before, but we can't see anything because the amount of light is beyond our dynamic range. It's too dark in there to see anything. It's just gone. There's not enough light in there. Maybe there is no light whatsoever, so therefore it just it can't ever be shown on a dynamic range because that's beyond. There has to be at least some light. But generally speaking, it's because there's just not enough light. And so that's the reason why we can't see well into that environment. The opposite is true also. For instance, don't do this, but if you were to look up into the sun, again, don't look up into the sun, but you don't see that bright orange, beautiful ball of light in the sky. You see a huge white nothingness that's so bright that it just hurts to even point your face in that direction. Well, actually, it feels good to point your face in that direction, but if you had your eyes open, it wouldn't. So it's so bright that it is beyond dynamic range. We can't see it. I mean, we know it's there, we can see it, but we can't see any detail of it. In order to photograph the sun, you've got to filter your lens so that you reduce a huge amount of light. Now, there are filters for that. In fact, right now we are in the year 2022. In the year 2024, just 2 years away, there's going to be a total eclipse of the sun during the day. And if you are, I'm in Texas. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, and here it'll be about 97% full. But if you go just an hour from here, maybe a little bit more than an hour and a half, to Fredericksburg, Texas, where the World War II Museum, Pacific War Museum is. By the way, if you haven't seen that, it's wild. It's fantastic. But in Fredericksburg, Texas, go get your hotel room reservations right now. You're going to see 100% for 2 minutes, where it's totally blocked out. You don't see the sun at all. Now you see kind of a ring around it, but it's dark. It'll get dark during the middle of the day. So even in that instance, you still want to have filters. And if you remember in 2017, when this also happened, and it went over kind of middle range, we went up to Missouri to see it. So it's kind of making an X compared to 2017 and 2024. Even then, they were selling these glasses that you couldn't see through unless you were looking at the sun, and you could see the sun in that instance. But you have these type of filters for your lens, and you can actually see the detail. So what that does is it brings it into dynamic range because it is reducing the amount of light. But we only have a certain range of tones, and humans have 14 stops. This is very impressive. Now, some of us have 13, some of us have 15. This is an average of 14 stops worth of light. This is huge. We can see a dynamic range greater than what most cameras can do. That's pretty fascinating. That's pretty darn awesome, in my opinion, that we can see so much light in different situations. We can see light in shadow areas. And we adjust. If you go into a dark room and there is some light in there, your eyes will adjust to that light. You've seen it before. You've experienced it. So you go into that room. Let's say that the light's on when you go into it, but then you turn the light off. After 10, 15 minutes, you can start seeing things in the room. They become comfortable. You can see them. Now, not as bright as if the lights were on, but what happens if someone comes in, didn't realize you were in there with the light off, and flipped the light switch on all of a sudden? What was comfortable 10, 15 minutes ago now hurts your eyes for a moment. because you have the ability, you as a human, your eyes, your brain have the ability to adjust slowly into one side, the shadow side or the highlight side, to adjust into that amount of light. Now, not completely in either direction. You have leeway, though, of probably another 5 stops in each direction. Your camera can do this in an instant. It takes you, your eyes, maybe 10, 15 minutes to adjust. But you've got this range, this dynamic range, and it is slowly variable. You don't have control over it, it just happens, but you do have control over it with your camera. Now, you may have heard of HDR, high dynamic range. That's just putting the word high in front of what we've been talking about, high dynamic range. High dynamic range means greater than dynamic range. And the way you do that, if that's what you want to do, let's say you've got a camera that only has 5 stops of light in its dynamic range. That doesn't mean your end result image is limited to that, because you could create 3 different images. Now, your camera needs to be on a tripod, and you need to be photographing something that is not in motion. For the most part. There's exceptions, but for the most part. So you're photographing this landscape scene. Maybe it's at night. And it could be during the day too, but you want to get a greater dynamic range than what your camera is able to do in one shot. So therefore you create 3 different images. One that's underexposed, one that's correctly exposed, one that's overexposed. And maybe you go even further than that. But once you're done with that, in post-production, so we're talking about Lightroom, Photoshop, and other image manipulation programs, you combine these images and get the best of all those different exposures into one photograph. That's high dynamic range. High dynamic range. So there we go. There's an overview of dynamic range. Now let's talk about the light meter that is handheld. A handheld light meter. Now I don't know how many of you are familiar with a handheld light meter, but I mentioned early on in this presentation that you weren't taken seriously if you didn't have a handheld light meter. Now, very few photographers have handheld light meters. Are there advantages to having handheld light meters? Of course there are. But because you've got that little screen on the back of your camera, by the way, I call that screen confidence, because, well, that's what it gives you. That screen on the back of your camera, you can see what it is you're getting. You create the image, you look at it, you make adjustments and changes and fix it to make it just the way you want. But when you had film, you didn't have that as a choice. And so that's why you can imagine light meter is kind of important. But now, because you can see it, you can just make adjustments on the fly. However, you are more accurate with a handheld light meter even still. So, while the meter inside your camera is good, just like everything else in life, there's something better. The handheld light meter does everything the camera can do and more. The camera meter reads the light being reflected off of surfaces. But a handheld light meter adds the ability to read incident light, meaning directly from the light source. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's say I'm the subject, you're photographing me. So the light you're seeing is not from the light source. It's from the light being reflected from the light source. So there's a light source, it's hitting my skin, and then it's going back into the camera. So your camera is reading from where you are to where I am. It's reading the reflected light. If you have a handheld meter, you can hold the handheld meter right here next to their face and point it at the light and get it exactly the right amount of light. Now, the right amount of light, just like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, is up to you. You may purposefully want it to be underexposed because you think it looks better that way. So therefore, you have ultimate control with a handheld light meter to make it that way, however it is that you want it. I see a lot of photographs today that are overexposed. And I think that people are liking that, but it's quite obvious that it's overexposed, meaning sometimes to the point where it's outside of dynamic range, meaning there's no detail in those highlight areas at all. When you go all the way to solid white and beyond, you get to the point where there's nothing there. As far as binary, there's no ones and zeros. It's blank. There's no detail. And there's nothing you can do to bring it back because it doesn't exist. Now, you have some leeway to be able to play with exposure, especially if you're using the RAW file type on your camera. You have it in JPEG too, but RAW gives you a little more leeway. But there's still a limit to what RAW can do. It's not endless. If you've totally overexposed your image, it doesn't matter whether you photographed in RAW or JPEG. If there's nothing there, if there's no ones and zeros there, if there's no detail at all, when you darken the image to bring back that detail, you'll just notice the skin tone going to gray. If you're photographing in black and white, you can actually get away with this to a small degree. But in color, not getting away with it. It just shows up as being ridiculously overexposed. Now, I know I've seen people who show off their favorite work, and it has this. So clearly they're okay with it. Then it is not bothering them. But to those of us who've been classically trained, there's no information there. So therefore, it's not a good thing. If there's no information, there's nothing I can do to manipulate it or change it or make it what I feel is better because I'm stuck with it. It's nothing. I'm stuck with the nothing, and I don't want the nothing. So therefore, I want to have some exposure in all areas. I want something there, even if it's right up to the edge of either solid white or solid black. I want something to be able to work with. And with a handheld light meter, I have an increased ability for accuracy. I don't have to have a light meter. I have the light meter that's on the screen right now. That's my light meter. There are some light meters that are, this one's probably 200 to 230, somewhere in that range. It's not a real expensive light meter. And then you have also, there are some very expensive light meters, and there's some that have spot meters on them. This one does not have a spot meter on it. And so I can, let's say I'm in Wyoming photographing the Grand Tetons, and in the foreground there's that real cool barn on the Wyoming side of the Tetons, where you see that. I think it's an old Mormon barn, and it's really cool as a foreground. I might want to spot meter that barn to get the barn just right. So a spot meter light meter might be the way to go. Now that's going to be more expensive. It's a little bit bigger, but talk about accuracy. It's just not going to get any more accurate than that. Your camera is reading the whole thing. Even if it is a spot, that spot over there is going to have to be pretty big. So your camera meter, good. Handheld meter, it's better. And of course there's different levels, because you can go to best with, depending on what your goal is. Sometimes for me, I've never needed anything greater than what you're seeing here on the screen. I've never needed anything better. So therefore it's what's best for what I do. But I'm well aware there's something that is better than it if I needed those tools. Just like if you're going into a big box tool store, there's a lot of tools in there, and they're all good, but they aren't all what's right for what you're trying to accomplish. And so we have to understand the tools well enough to be able to choose the tools that are right for what we're trying to accomplish. So for landscape work, if the light where I am is identical to the light where my subject is. So I'm in Colorado, and I'm photographing those mountains way over there and that beautiful lake that's in the foreground. If I'm in the same exact light that they are in, then the light meter in my camera does well. But if I have a handheld light meter, I just hold it out and measure the light that's coming from the sun and going into my light meter. Now, that little white globe that you see up at the top before it slides down to the right, that is called a lumisphere, and that is just it's just a covering that is translucent that allows light to pass through. there's if I'm using it in that instance where I'm just holding it out, then I want to have that lumisphere covering it, that light globe, if you prefer, covering it. But in just a moment, I'm going to tell you when I don't want it covering it, when I'm talking about portrait work. But for landscape work, I'm holding that light meter out with that white dome pointed in the direction of my light source. Now, this is the direction of the light source that I'm trying to meter. So, for instance, a lot of times that's going to be straight up, but I may be photographing the side of something. So therefore, I want to point and again, if it's got to be the same amount of light as in both places, for me and for it, then I am pointing it at me if it's on the side of it, because if that's the same amount of light. All right. This causes me to get an accurate meter reading, which then I transfer over to the camera. So I'm moving that shutter speed f-stop ISO to the camera, so that it has the same thing as what I'm seeing on my screen on my handheld meter. Now, I mentioned portrait work. So for portrait work, if I'm doing ambient lighting, available light, I can remove that lumisphere and hold the light meter next to my subject and point it in the direction of the window light or wherever the light source is. I point it in that direction, and that will give me an accurate meter reading in that point. Now, right here on the cheek, whichever the light side is, so if I have let's say I have more light on one side than the other. So I'm going to block some. There we go. I have one side of my face that's brighter than the other. This side's dark, this side's bright. So I'm going to meter the lighting right here on that lighter side cheek. That's where I'm metering it. This is approximately 18% gray or middle gray. It's actually a little bit lighter because, well, I have lighter skin. However, this is where I want to, this is the place where I want to meter, right there. Sometimes here, but almost always right there on the cheek. So that's my goal. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. And so I'm pointing it in the direction of light. In studio light, the camera's light meter, if I'm using studio light, flash, that brief moment of time, your camera meter can't do anything in that regard. Nothing. In fact, if you're going to be creating images with studio lighting, and you could be doing that outside too, but if you're going to be, say it's in a studio, you're using a flash, not hot lights, not continuous lighting, but a flash of light, strobes. Your camera's meter does nothing. Auto mode doesn't work. Program mode doesn't work. The only thing that gives you potential to get the right exposure is manual mode, and you doing it on your own. You don't have to have a light meter to do it because you can do trial and error and look at your image and make adjustments. But with a light meter, I can get it right the first time. No adjusting. No trial and error because I've gotten it exactly right in my handheld meter. So just like with ambient light, I put that meter next to my subject's face pointed towards the light source, and the meter will read the amount of light of the flash. All right. There's a lot of stuff in there, and I could keep on keeping on, but that's what I've prepared for you for today. So, James or Melissa, do you guys have any thoughts or questions or follow-up things to ask me?
Well, I was going to ask, I know some people have asked, when is it right to use, I guess, the white balancing cards with your meter?
Yeah. So the white balance is not what I would use with my light meter. That would be what I would be using to get the correct amount of light. And when the time when I care about the correct amount of light or the correct color of light is when I'm using JPEGs and I need to. Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate you saying that. The right amount of, or the right color of light is if I'm doing JPEG. So if I'm photographing an event and I need to get those images out immediately and I won't have really time to be able to go through them and do the correct post-processing that I would, usually prefer to do, then I'm creating it in as a JPEG. And I'm creating a JPEG. I care about getting the color right, and so I'm going to use a white card. For instance, let's say I was a school portrait photographer and I had a background for everyone, but they weren't wearing uniforms. Everybody was wearing something different. Somebody comes in a white shirt. Someone comes in a gray shirt. Someone else comes in a neon green shirt. Someone comes in a red barbacoa shirt. You know, they come in all different kinds of things. So if I'm photographing JPEGs, then I care about getting my light meter right for that background,
So
so that the color of the shirt that someone's wearing or the color of their hair doesn't change my color balance. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with today's topic. That's
yeah.
that's color balance. Now, we do put them close together because we have a white card for color balance and we have a gray card to get the amount of light correct. Now, the way that works is if we have a gray card, then we're guaranteed that gray is the halfway point between solid black and solid white. So therefore, we have ultimate accuracy because we know that that's where it is. And so you have that gray card, and you're measuring reflected light off of that gray card.
Now I'm trying to show your face really quick. Sorry, Jim. Like I said, my thing is kind of lagging here.
Is it?
There.
Dr. B, thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. You rock.
So many
I
people
appreciate that
appreciate
kind of
what you
thing.
do for us, Jim. Like I said, you take your time and you give all of these things. I think one of the ways I explain some of your stuff here is that there's a lot of emerging photographers who have a hard time finding a mentor. And I think making yourself available, not only on this particular program, the other ones that you do, um, your photo essay club, there's just so many ways you make yourself available to people to kind of be able to use your knowledge. And so it's very much appreciated. I think throughout the photography community, they really appreciate you taking that time to sit here and explaining, step by step, how you could use all of these different tools. And I'm just really trying to get rid of this thing and it doesn't want to go away. Like I said, the gremlins today are just like playing with my machine and I'm just having to let them go, have a good time with it.
That's
Um,
funny.
but we really appreciate, like I said, you taking this time and presenting everything in such detail so that people can kind of really grasp um, all of these different techniques, all of these different tools. Uh, it's much appreciated.
Awesome.
Now, let's go ahead with what do you have any announcements there, Jim, on anything that's going on for you that you have coming up with Photo Essay or?
Yeah, I would like to share a couple of things that I have coming up. Uh, um, on the bottom of your screen, Melissa, I put up a photo essay flyer. Now it's our general flyer. It's not the
Okay.
specific one for this one that's coming up. But I don't know if it'd be helpful to see that just so someone knows what it's about.
Yeah, I'm putting
Um,
it right now.
cool. But it is this camera club is for those who are in the San Antonio general area. There's a little over 2 million people in the San Antonio area, which I know if you're watching from somewhere away that you a long way away, if you're not familiar with San Antonio, you're probably surprised that San Antonio is the seventh largest city in the entire U.S. And the Dallas is number 8 or 9. We're bigger than Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're not bigger than the Dallas Fort Worth metro
Yeah.
area, though, because that's like 6 million, some ridiculously large number. I don't know exactly how many, but as far as Dallas itself, San Antonio is larger. And so this is a camera club for those who are in our general area called Photo SA. And it's really a social club. We bring in a speaker once a month on the second Thursday of every single month. So that's 1 week from today. So that's September 8th. And we meet at a really cool place. We meet at the Dominion Country Club. And it's a beautiful spot, and our speakers always enjoy it. The members always enjoy it. We have cookies and lemonade or tea or something to have with it as well. But the speakers come in and share what it is they're passionate about. It's not a class. Almost never is it a class. It's just about what motivates that individual to do what they do, why they do it, what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it. But it's not a class like we just went through today. It's not a photo 101 or anything. It's not how to use your shutter speeds, how to use your f-stops, how to do color balance. It's none of those things. It's just, what is this person passionate about? What do they do? Last month, we had the official photographer for the city of San Antonio, which most of us, including myself, didn't even know existed. We didn't know that there was such a thing. It makes sense that there is such a thing. We just didn't know it. But he came in and spoke. But the one that we have coming up on September 8th he's a university teacher, or he's retired now. But he did engineering. So his topic won't be anything about what he did for a living. But he enjoys photography, but has no intention of doing anything to make money with it. So he doesn't want to build a site where people buy his photographs, but he definitely wants to have that quality level. So his thought was, well, what does a hobbyist do who wants to be that good but doesn't want to do that business side at all? Where do they fall? What do they do? And so he's going to share what he does and his passion and his excitement for photography, just for being a wonderful hobbyist. So that's what his name's Kevin Hogue. He's also the chairman of the board for the annual San Antonio Photography Tournament, which is going to be held on October 16th. That's a Sunday, and it's an instant gratification photographer's challenge where we give the 15 categories at the beginning of the tournament. You don't know about it ahead of time. You bring your camera with you. You go out and photograph as many of those categories as you want to. You can do one. You can do all 15. And then you turn them in before lunch. Then you have lunch while our judges are judging. And then after lunch, we announce the winners, give away the prizes. And by the way, FinerWorks is one of the major sponsors and has been from the beginning. This year is the 10th annual San Antonio Photography Tournament, and FinerWorks has been a major sponsor every single time. And so there are gift cards to win from FinerWorks, and there's a lot of other prizes as well. We have usually somewhere between $20,000 worth of prizes, and for one, we had our peak ever was $72,000 worth of prizes, and usually around 100 photographers will compete. So that's pretty stinking good.
Yeah.
Especially when it only costs $39 to join. It's cheap. By the way, you can get that information by just going to landersphotoschool.com, landersphotoschool.com. So, and we have a Photo 101 that's coming up. Now, that Photo 101 is in person. Just like the camera club is in person, just like the tournament is in person, Photo 101 is in person also. So we don't have a recorded version of this. Well, we do, but that's not what we're talking about today. So this is in person. You come to each of the classes. This is 5 2-hour sessions held over a 2.5 week period, because it's on Monday, Wednesday. It's Monday, Wednesday 1 week, Monday, Wednesday the next week, and Monday then that third week. So it's one right after the other. The instructor for this one is not me. It's one of my other teachers. And he has, just like I have, about 30 years of experience. We both have about the same amount of experience. His name's Jack Braden. And he has his own studio, and it's located near the airport, the San Antonio airport. So someone could fly in for this, and we've only seen that happen once, where someone flew in, and it made me feel really good that they flew in from wherever they were to come in to attend one of my classes. But the truth is, they had a dual purpose. They had a friend they wanted to visit, and this was the excuse she gave her husband. She wanted to take the class and visit her friend, and her husband. They agree on expenditures, and so that convinced him. So She thought it was awesome. And we also have Photoshop 101 coming up. And if you go to landersphotoschool.com, you'll see more information about these. So go to landersphotoschool.com, click on classes, and click on the class you want. Now, we are going to reduce the number of classes that we have. So that number that you see there is about 120. We're reducing that down to under 10 because we're making some changes. We're going to be doing a lot of things online. But here's the next one that's coming up is Intro to Portrait Photography. This is going to be on 5 consecutive Saturdays beginning in October. And so I recommend all of these. Jack Braden is the teacher for every single one of these, and he's fantastic, and you'll appreciate him. So I encourage you, take a look. Go to landersphotoschool.com.
Yeah, a lot of information there, and a lot of great things to learn. So yeah, I'll definitely take advantage of some of those. And like I said, I think those are like what you were mentioning, somebody coming in, flying in. That's the best thing. It's like a photo excursion kind of
That's right.
experience here. And there's so much this month, like I said, in San Antonio, because it's Photo Septiembre. So we have here so many photography exhibits going on right
That's
around.
right.
I know there's tonight is kind of like a soft opening for many of the places. And then tomorrow being Fresh Friday, Blue Star, the art complex, has a lot of photography going on. I know they're going to be showing some stuff from Rick Hunter, who is a photographer that was pretty well known here in San Antonio, worked at the San Antonio Express News, and he passed away a couple of years ago or several years ago. And his work still kind of lives on. And I think that's another kind of attribute to photography. Your legacy lives on, you know. We have, I think on the 23rd here at La Villita, Dr. Preston is going to be releasing a photography book of public art here in San Antonio. And again, just how photography, kind of gives a contribution to the narrative of a city. It's kind he's paired up with one of the poet laureates to do that book. So it's just like I said, this is what I like about the month of September. It really highlights photography here, and people getting to use all of these techniques that you have taught us. Well over a year now here, so it's great. We also again want to remind everybody. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. It's just been so. It's been kind of a stop and go thing with all of the different. Let me see if it'll let me do it. But we do have that sale that ends tomorrow, and let's see if it'll let me pop this in here. We got a whole different aspect ratio popping up in here right now. Let's go to that. Let's see if it'll let me select our Chrome tab just so we can take a look. If not, we'll do this really quick and messy. Let's see. Okay, I think it's gonna let me select it. It's just taking time. I have a lag going on my end right now. Don't know why. But we do have our acrylic sale going on. James, did you want to say a little bit about that while I'm trying to see if I can get that screen to share?
The acrylic, these are for either the face-mounted acrylic or the as well as the framed float acrylics. The difference between the two is that the face-mounted acrylic prints are actually printed on a photo paper, very high resolution printing technology, and it is utilizing a special adhesive. It is actually mounted on one side of the acrylic with the printed image facing out. This graphic kind of illustrates it. And then there's a backing of either just a paper backing or dye bond placed on the back to give it some extra rigidity. The acrylic's about 1/4 of an inch thick, I believe, and then it comes with hanging hardware installed, so it's very easy to hang. Mm-hmm. It looks incredibly sleek. A lot of people know us for our HD metal prints, the Chromlux metal prints, and we're a favorite with many artists and photographers just because the quality of that we're known for with those. But I'll say this: that the HD, in my opinion at least, the acrylic prints look even nicer. So if you want something really substantial and something that really stands out, the face-mounted acrylic prints look incredible. Now, then we also have our float frame acrylics, which are done a little bit differently. They're actually printed directly on the acrylic, so they're not going to have be as sharp or as crisp, but they look
I get it.
incredible. They look fantastic, and we have a number of framing options available with those. And then the acrylic plaques aren't included in
Oh, they're
this.
not included in this one. Okay, that's, I think somebody was asking about that. Okay. And that's also, again, my clicks are just kind of
Yeah, I think that special ends on
Friday.
Friday. Yeah, tomorrow. Okay,
So yeah, so we just want people to take advantage of it. And then just a reminder again that we are closed Monday, September 5th for Labor Day. So that includes our customer service. And of course, that means it's not a regular business day for turnaround time. So just note that if you need to for any of your orders.
Yeah.
All right. And anything else you can think of, James or Jim, that we need to have on there?
What are we going to do next month?
Oh, that is right. Our next one is discussing sales techniques for people who don't like to sell, which that is, I went for
Cool.
photographers, for artists, and that's something neat. You want to give a little bit of a
Yeah,
of what
for
that's going to
sure.
be about?
So some of us creatives are good at sales, but the majority of us aren't good at sales at all. In fact, it's some of us, find other ways, like having images online where you don't have to sell anything directly yourself, is one solution for those who feel self-conscious about talking to someone about their work. And it's a good tool no matter what. Even for those who are really good at sales, they should have an online store where their images are available. But for those of us who are going to be talking to someone, there are some real things that we can do to really help our sales. There are different businesses that we can partner with. You just imagine, here's one, an interior decorator for businesses. Now, if that person is in business and doing well, they have lots of clients. And while your artwork isn't the right thing for every single client they have, if you make yourself available as a partner, as someone who has a good relationship with that interior designer, and I don't recommend having a good relationship with just one, but if you can imagine having that good relationship with that designer, then when appropriate, it's your work that goes in because you stepped out of your comfort zone, because I understand the anxiety that we can have as creatives and as introverts. That we think of the things that we can do, and then somehow we second guess ourselves and wind up talking ourselves out because we have the creative mind to be able to come up with the ideas. We sometimes have the introverted tendencies and anxiety that causes us to second guess, thinking we're not good enough, thinking someone else is better, it's thinking we're going to make a mistake, and we don't actually do the things we need to do. And so, man, if we can put together some of these cool thoughts and ideas, that we as creatives do well, if we can see the end result of something we really want, we creatives can do anything if we see the end result of something that we want. And so we're going to talk about how to make that happen rather than, oh, would you please consider buying my stuff? Because, yeah, you're going to be uncomfortable with that. I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm uncomfortable if you're talking to me that way. Of course. But we creatives, ooh, man, we can do all kinds of things if we'll think about what the end result is going to be and plan for that. And then these little things that used to make us uncomfortable are just little pieces along the way that we had to do to get what we wanted. Oh, man. We're going to be liking sales at some point because of doing it this way. I didn't like sales to begin with. I wasn't interested in the business side very much. I wasn't averse to it. I wasn't anti-business, but I was uncomfortable with asking for money because that's what I narrowed it. I just boiled it all down to, well, I'm just asking somebody for money. It's not what's happening. Now, do you believe in your work? Do you care about it? Do you think it's pretty darn good? Do you love it? Do you hope it has the effect on others where they have an emotional connection to it? All right, if that's the goal, then this is a good thing. And money is just an exchange, just what happens as a side effect. It's not what you're boiling it down to. What you're boiling it down to is the emotions that people feel as a result of getting connected to your work. Oh man, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be something, like I said, everyone can use. Well, Jim, again, thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it, you doing these every month with us.
Of course, happy to do it. You guys rock.
Hope we'll see you soon. Well, no, definitely see you by next month.
All right.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There we go. Yeah. Okay, because now I gotta go. Leave studio.